Sojourner Truth, born Isabella Baumfree in 1797 in Ulster County, New York, came into the world during a time of profound inequality and injustice. Born into slavery, her early years were marked by hardship. Yet even in the depths of these struggles, there was an unshakable resolve that would guide her through a remarkable transformation. Sojourner Truth's life would unfold against the backdrop of some of the most turbulent times in American history. But she would remain a steady, unwavering voice for freedom and equality. She was a woman who not only fought for her own freedom but for the liberation of others, enslaved men and women, and later for women's rights. Her journey from the quiet isolation of slavery to becoming one of the most iconic figures in the abolitionist and suffrage movements is a testament to her resilience and faith. As we settle into her story, let the calm progression of Sojourner Truth's life carry you gently through the years. If you find peace in these words, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing where you're listening from. But for now, simply allow yourself to drift through her quiet, steady path toward freedom and justice. Sojourner Truth was born Isabella Baumfree on November 26, 1797, in Ulster County, New York. She came into the world on a small farm that belonged to a Dutch landowner named Johannes Hardenberg. Her parents, James and Elizabeth Baumfree, were enslaved, and Isabella, along with her siblings, was born into a life of captivity. The early years of her life were marked by the quiet harshness of slavery, where every day was an act of survival, yet it was also a time when seeds of resilience were planted deep within her. Isabella's mother, Elizabeth, was forced to work on the farm under the constant watch of their owner. Isabella's father, James, was a strong man, but like many enslaved men, his strength could not shield his family from the cruel systems of bondage that ruled their lives. The family was often separated, as was common among enslaved families, and Isabella's bond with her mother became one of the few constants in her early life. As a young child, Isabella was tasked with simple chores around the farm, though she had little control over her own life. She was taught early on that her value was measured by her ability to work. She worked alongside other enslaved children, learning quickly that in her world, survival depended on submission and obedience. Yet, beneath the heavy weight of these years, Isabella's curiosity about the world began to take shape. Her name, Isabella Baumfree, was not hers to choose. Like all enslaved people, she was given a name by her owner, one that was tied to the ownership of her body. This name would stay with her for many years, even as her sense of self grew stronger, until one day she would choose to cast it aside, embracing a name that reflected her inner transformation. But for now, the name Baumfree was a reminder of her unfree status, and each day she lived in this quiet, unrelenting captivity. Isabella's earliest years were spent in isolation, as her family's experience was one of deep separation. She had little opportunity for formal education or social interaction outside the confines of slavery. She learned of the world not through books, but through the small, personal stories and quiet moments shared between her and her mother. Her mother's love and wisdom provided a steady foundation in Isabella's young life, one that would later shape her strength and resolve. By the time Isabella was 9 years old, her life would take another turn. In 1806, her mother was sold to a new master, and Isabella too was sold, this time to a man named John Neely. She was no longer a child at play, but had to learn to face the adult realities of a life where she had no say in her own fate. This was an experience many enslaved people shared, as families were often torn apart to ensure that the labour force would be continually replenished. Under John Neely's ownership, Isabella's life became even more difficult. Her new master was cruel, and she was given hard work that tested both her body and spirit. The intensity of this new life was not unfamiliar to her, but it marked the beginning of a deeper suffering. Neely's harsh treatment made her a keen observer of the system that controlled her every move, but also sparked a fire in her, a desire to one day be free. Despite the hardships of these early years, Isabella began to display a quiet resilience. She learned to do the work assigned to her with skill and dedication, even when it was physically demanding. She had little to rely on except her own strength, and it was in this time that she began to realize the depth of her inner strength. She also became acutely aware of the ways in which the lives of enslaved people were controlled, marked by little more than the will of those who owned them. In these early years of her life, she began to dream of something more. Though those around her could not imagine freedom, Isabella started to sense that there was more to life than the chains that bound her. There were moments when she would look up at the sky, and something within her would stir, a quiet longing for a different existence. These small moments of reflection, while fleeting, were the beginnings of a life that would transcend the limitations placed upon her. The years spent under John Neely's ownership were years of deep hardship, but they were also years of transformation. Isabella's spirit, though bruised, was not broken. Each day she quietly endured the suffering, but something inside her was shifting. She would come to know herself not as a slave, but as a woman capable of defying the forces that sought to control her. These early years in Ulster County shaped Isabella into the woman she would later become, strong, determined, and unafraid to stand up for what she believed in. The world may have attempted to define her by her circumstances, but Isabella Bamfrey was destined for a different path. She had no way of knowing it then, but the seeds of her future activism and strength were already planted in the soil of her early years. As Isabella Bamfrey grew older, her life continued to unfold in the confines of slavery. In 1810, when she was around 13, she was sold to a new master, a man named John Neely. This marked a turning point in her young life, as she was torn from her family and placed in a harsh new environment where the challenges of slavery intensified. At this age, Isabella began to understand more deeply the realities of being an enslaved person. Her early years had been difficult, but now the hardships she faced were more pronounced, more isolating, and more severe. John Neely's farm was located some distance from her family, and Isabella found herself separated from her mother and siblings. This separation from her family became a defining experience in her life. It would echo throughout her years, as she would later reflect on the deep pain of having loved ones torn away from her. She had no control over her own fate, no power to reunite with her family, and no voice in decisions that affected her life. The experience of being torn away from her family left a deep mark on Isabella. Family was central to her early years, and the loss of that bond was a stark reminder of the dehumanizing nature of slavery. As she worked on the Neely farm, Isabella found herself struggling not just with the physical labor required of her, but with the emotional weight of being separated from everything she had known. The absence of her mother, whose presence had been her anchor, left a void that would take years to fill. Neely's farm was a place of hard labor, and Isabella was often tasked with grueling chores, such as carrying heavy loads, working in the fields, and caring for livestock. These duties, though exhausting, were nothing new to her, as they reflected the daily life of an enslaved person. What was different, however, was the emotional toll of being separated from her family. At a young age, Isabella began to understand the full depth of what it meant to be enslaved. Not only were her labor and her body controlled, but so too were the bonds she shared with those she loved. Yet, even in this environment of isolation and hardship, Isabella's spirit began to harden, preparing her for the challenges to come. Her resilience, though quiet, was growing stronger. She learned to endure the weight of her circumstances, and while her world was shaped by a system that saw her as little more than property, Isabella began to cultivate a sense of inner strength. In the isolation of her new life, she discovered a deep well of determination, a quiet resolve that would carry her through many trials in the years to come. Isabella was not alone in her struggles. At the Neely farm, she worked alongside other enslaved individuals, some of whom had also been separated from their families. These other workers shared in her hardships, and over time Isabella formed bonds with them, quiet, unspoken connections forged through mutual suffering. These relationships, though subtle, shaped her understanding of the world and deepened her resolve to fight for her freedom. The labour on the Neely farm was relentless, and Isabella's body began to feel the toll of the physical work. She was young, but the demands placed upon her were heavy. Yet, even as she toiled, there was something within her that began to shift. Her quiet resistance to the injustice of her situation grew stronger. She began to question the system that had placed her in this life, the system that had torn her away from her family and forced her into hard labour. Though her voice was silenced, her mind was not. She could not escape the confines of slavery, but she began to imagine a life outside of it. At the Neely farm, Isabella's daily routine revolved around obedience and survival. There was little room for rest, as her existence was defined by constant work. In the absence of her family, she clung to the one thing she could control, her own mind. During moments of solitude, she would retreat into her thoughts, reflecting on her life and imagining what freedom might look like. Though she had no way of knowing it then, these moments of quiet contemplation would lay the groundwork for her eventual pursuit of liberation. In her work, Isabella found moments of clarity and strength. She did not yet understand the full scope of what it would take to secure her freedom, but she began to sense that there was more to life than the limited existence she had been given. Her early years at the Neely farm were filled with suffering, but they were also filled with quiet resistance, a slow growing awareness of her power and potential. By the time Isabella turned 16, she had already endured more than many could imagine. The pain of separation from her family, the grueling labour, and the emotional toll of living as an enslaved person were becoming more than she could bear. Yet, through it all, she began to develop the inner strength that would later define her. The world around her may have tried to suppress her spirit, but Isabella's resilience was quietly taking root, preparing her for the journey ahead. These early years of struggle and isolation would shape the woman Isabella Baumfree would become. Though her body was confined by the shackles of slavery, her mind began to open to the possibility of something more. These moments of quiet reflection, while small, were the seeds of change, seeds that would later blossom into a life of activism, advocacy, and unyielding strength. As Isabella Baumfree entered her teenage years, her life under the ownership of John Neely began to unfold with new challenges. After being sold to him at the age of 13, Isabella faced a life marked by increased hardship, both physically and emotionally. Neely's farm was located some distance away from Isabella's family, further deepening her isolation. For the first time, she experienced the full weight of being separated from everything familiar: her family, her community, and the environment that had been her entire world. John Neely was a man who, like many enslavers, saw Isabella not as a person, but as property. Under his ownership, Isabella's daily life was filled with intense physical labour. Her tasks ranged from tending to livestock, working in the fields, to other grueling chores that kept her constantly on the move. The nature of the work at Neely's farm was demanding, with little room for respite, and Isabella soon realized the full depth of what it meant to be enslaved. The physical labour was not the only challenge she faced. The emotional toll of being so far from her family weighed heavily on her. With each passing day, Isabella longed to be reunited with her mother and siblings. This sense of loss became a defining feature of her early teenage years. As an adolescent, she began to experience a more profound sense of what it meant to be without the comfort of family. The absence of the loving presence of her mother left an indelible mark on her, one that would stay with her as she moved through her life. Despite the isolation and the pain of being separated from her family, Isabella was not entirely alone in her work. She spent her days with other enslaved individuals, some of whom had been sold away from their families as well. These people who shared her experience became her companions in a world that sought to dehumanize them. Over time, Isabella formed deep unspoken bonds with her fellow enslaved workers, a silent recognition of shared suffering. These relationships, though forged under duress, would become a source of quiet strength for Isabella. As the years went by, Isabella's physical strength grew, but so too did her awareness of the unfairness of her situation. She had grown accustomed to the hardships of daily life, but she could not reconcile the injustice of being denied her basic human rights. Isabella began to question the system that bound her to a life of labour, separated her from her loved ones and stripped her of autonomy. Though she had no words to articulate her desire for freedom, there was an unmistakable inner stirring that called her toward something greater. In the midst of these struggles, Isabella found moments of solitude where she could reflect. She often found herself dreaming of a life where she could be free from the chains that bound her body and the restrictions that confined her spirit. While she could not yet see the path to freedom, she began to feel the weight of her own agency. She began to understand that despite the barriers of slavery, there was something within her that could never be fully controlled. Her spiritual beliefs, which had always played a role in her life, began to grow stronger during this period. The faith that had sustained her in earlier years became an anchor in the storm of her experiences. Isabella's faith gave her strength, helping her endure the hardships she faced daily. It was in her quiet moments of prayer and reflection that she began to find a sense of peace, even in the midst of turmoil. Though her circumstances seemed unchangeable, Isabella's mind began to grow sharper with each passing year. She began to develop a deep understanding of the world around her, noticing the patterns of inequality and injustice that shaped her life. Her experiences at Neely's farm provided her with an education of sorts, an education in the realities of slavery, the weight of oppression, and the strength of the human spirit. Even in the most difficult moments, Isabella clung to the hope that there was more to life than what she had known. At the age of 19, Isabella experienced a pivotal moment in her life. She began to understand her own worth and the importance of asserting her humanity. It was during this time that she began to learn the power of her voice, even though it was not yet fully realized. Isabella understood at deep level that her life, her very existence, was valuable. She carried within her a quiet but steadfast resolve, one that would one day lead her to leave behind the life of servitude she had known. The years spent under John Neely's ownership were not years of overt rebellion, but they were years of quiet resistance. In her own way, Isabella refused to accept the limitations placed on her. While she performed her labour dutifully, she did so with the knowledge that she was more than just a servant to be exploited. She was a person, a woman whose strength, character, and mind could not be fully contained by the chains of slavery. As Isabella reached her early 20s, her thoughts began to turn toward the possibility of escape. The idea of freedom, once a distant dream, began to take on a new shape in her mind. Though she still had no means to escape, the seed of liberation was quietly planted within her. She began to realize that despite the years of hard work and suffering, she could make choices that might one day lead her to a life outside the confines of slavery. The years with John Neely were years of quiet strength and inner growth. They were years filled with physical labor and emotional pain, but they were also years of reflection, resilience, and a quiet longing for freedom. Isabella's journey was just beginning, and each day she spent under Neely's ownership brought her one step closer to the life she would one day claim for herself. By the time Isabella Bamfree reached the age of 29, she had endured many years of hardship, hard labor, and separation from her family. The years spent in captivity had shaped her into a strong, resilient woman. Yet the chains that bound her to slavery continued to weigh heavily on her soul. During this time, she began to reflect on her life circumstances, and in these quiet moments, a deep desire for freedom grew within her. Isabella's opportunity for freedom came in 1826. In a pivotal moment of courage, she made the decision to escape. It was not a decision she made lightly, for it meant leaving behind everything she had ever known. Her family, the life she had been forced to live, and the security, however harsh, of the life under her enslaver. But there was a quiet certainty within her. She could no longer live under the weight of her captivity. She longed for a life where her body and spirit would be her own. At the time, Isabella was living with a man named John Dumont, a new master who had given her more responsibilities and demands. Yet, despite the relatively more lenient treatment she received, she felt deeply that her soul could not bear the weight of slavery any longer. It was in this quiet moment of realization that she made the decision to leave. Her decision to escape was not made in haste, but through a quiet determination. She'd been preparing herself mentally and emotionally for this moment, reflecting on her inner strength and her desire to live a life of freedom. Her longing for liberation had quietly built up over the years, and when the opportunity arose, she seized it without looking back. In 1826, Isabella took a bold and decisive step. She fled from John Dumont's estate, taking with her her infant daughter. She left in the middle of the night with no clear path or certain destination, relying on nothing but her own willpower and determination. She walked away from everything she knew, knowing that the life of a free woman lay ahead of her, if only she could find it. Isabella's escape was fraught with danger, and the journey was filled with uncertainty. She had no money, no means of transportation, and no friends to turn to. Yet, despite these challenges, she pressed on, determined to find freedom. For many, the idea of escaping slavery seemed impossible, but for Isabella, the idea of continuing to live under the yoke of oppression was no longer an option. She had tasted the bitterness of captivity for too long and knew that she would not rest until she found her way to freedom. Her journey took her first to the home of a kind-hearted man who sheltered her briefly. From there, she continued her journey, knowing that she was at the mercy of those who might choose to help her, or worse, turn her in. But the quiet resolve within her never wavered. Each step she took was a step toward freedom, and she could feel the weight of her captivity slowly lifting. After several days of travel, Isabella reached the home of a Dutch family who were sympathetic to her cause. They offered her refuge, and it was here that Isabella found her first taste of freedom. She knew that her journey was not yet over, but she had found the safety and comfort that allowed her to take a breath, to pause, and to regroup. Through the kindness of this family, Isabella was able to secure passage to New York City, where she could finally make her way to freedom. After years of living under the harshest conditions, she was now on the verge of escaping the bonds of slavery for good. Yet, even though she had taken this monumental step, she knew the journey was far from over. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but it was a road that led toward a future where she could live as a free woman. Eventually, Isabella reached New York, and with the help of abolitionists, she was able to make her way to freedom. She found a home in a community of free black people, and it was here that she began to take the first steps toward reclaiming her life and her identity. She had escaped the chains of slavery, but the work of becoming a free person, of truly understanding what it meant to live as a free woman, was just beginning. Through it all, Isabella's faith in God and her inner strength carried her. She believed that her escape was part of a divine plan, and that she'd been chosen for a greater purpose. This quiet faith, which had sustained her through the darkest of times, was now her guiding light as she began her new life in freedom. But even in freedom, Isabella faced the harsh realities of living in a world that still sought to suppress her voice and her rights. Yet, despite these challenges, Isabella's journey toward freedom was a powerful testament to her resilience. She had made the choice to free herself from the bonds of slavery, and in doing so she had taken the first steps toward becoming the woman who would go on to inspire generations with her voice, her strength, and her unyielding pursuit of justice. Adopted the name Sojourner Truth, and began to travel as an advocate, Isabella had transformed into a formidable force for change. Her message of freedom, equality, and justice resonated deeply with audiences, and she became a prominent figure in the abolitionist and women's rights movements. Her quiet, powerful presence and ability to speak to the heart of the matter made her one of the most respected voices of her time. As Sojourner Truth travelled the country speaking to large crowds and spreading her message of equality, she grew into a prominent and respected figure within both the abolitionist and women's suffrage movements. By the 1850s, her advocacy had taken on a more focused and powerful form. She was no longer merely speaking to small gatherings, but as now a key figure in the fight for freedom and justice, using her voice to challenge both the institution of slavery and the social constraints placed on women. In the early part of the 1850s, Sojourner Truth began to deepen her involvement in the abolitionist movement. Her powerful narrative, as a woman who had escaped the horrors of slavery, resonated with abolitionists, and her speeches were filled with a call for the immediate emancipation of enslaved people. She understood the power of her personal experience. Her story was not just one of survival, but one of defiance. By telling her story, she could awaken the consciences of others and inspire action. Her presence at abolitionist meetings, including those of the American Anti-Slavery Society, began to gain attention. Sojourner Truth had a natural ability to connect with people from all walks of life. Her simple, honest language struck a chord with listeners, particularly as she intertwined her experiences of enslavement with a call for justice. Her message was always clear. Slavery was not just a political issue, it was a moral atrocity. She advocated for the immediate end of slavery, asserting that no human being should ever be subjected to such brutal treatment. In addition to her work for the abolition of slavery, Sojourner Truth became a steadfast advocate for women's rights. As she spoke at abolitionist gatherings, she also took every opportunity to speak about women's rights, particularly the rights of black women. Truth understood that the liberation of enslaved people and the equality of women were not separate struggles. To her, these two movements were intrinsically linked, as both sought to overthrow systems of oppression that denied basic human rights. One of Sojourner Truth's most notable speeches came at the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio in 1851. There she delivered the now famous "Ain't I a Woman" speech, which would become one of the defining moments of her public life. In this speech, Truth boldly and calmly challenged the prevailing notions of what it meant to be a woman, especially a black woman. She pointed out that, while white women were fighting for the right to vote and equal treatment, black women like herself had not even been granted basic human dignity. Her speech highlighted the intersection of race and gender, and made clear that the struggles for racial and gender equality were deeply connected. Her speech was an eloquent response to the sexism that often overshadowed the suffrage movement, as well as the racism that excluded black women from mainstream feminist circles. In her calm, powerful tone, she made the point that her womanhood was just as valid as that of any white woman, and that her strength, both physical and emotional, was a testament to the resilience of black women everywhere. "Ain't I a woman?" became a rallying cry for many who felt marginalized by both the abolitionist and feminist movements. In the 1860s, as the Civil War raged on, Sojourner Truth's advocacy expanded to include support for the Union cause. She worked tirelessly to encourage black people to enlist in the Union Army and fought for the rights of black women to participate in the war effort. She'd personally seen the horrors of slavery and the toll it took on human lives, and she believed that the fight for freedom was a battle that must be won by all, regardless of gender or race. Sojourner Truth's efforts during the Civil War extended beyond speeches and public appearances. She worked with the Freedmen's Bureau, which was established to help formerly enslaved people adjust to their new lives after emancipation. In addition to her advocacy, she raised funds and recruited soldiers to join the Union Army. Her work with the Freedmen's Bureau helped to lay the groundwork for the post-war Reconstruction efforts, though much work still remained to be done. Her involvement with the women's suffrage movement was particularly significant during this period. As the war came to an end and the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in 1865, Sojourner Truth began advocating for the rights of black women in particular. She recognized that while the end of slavery was a monumental victory, it did not guarantee full citizenship or equality for black Americans, especially women. She spoke out at women's suffrage meetings, advocating for voting rights for all women, regardless of race. Despite her tireless work, Sojourner Truth faced resistance from both men and women who were unwilling to fully embrace the idea of equal rights for black women. Many white suffragists, focused primarily on their own rights, were not ready to support black women in their quest for equality. Yet Sojourner Truth did not waver. Her voice, though often quiet and steady, was unyielding in its call for justice. Throughout the 1860s, Truth's speeches continued to inspire those who heard them. Her work was crucial not only to the abolitionist cause but also to the women's suffrage movement. As the United States entered the Reconstruction era, Sojourner Truth's legacy was beginning to take shape. Though she had not yet seen the full fruits of her labor, racial and gender equality for all. Her contributions were an undeniable part of the foundation upon which future civil rights and women's rights movements would be built. Sojourner Truth's rise as an abolitionist and suffragist was not marked by dramatic gestures or heated rhetoric. Rather, it was her quiet, steadfast presence and her unshakable commitment to justice that made her one of the most respected and influential figures of her time. Her work laid the groundwork for future generations to continue the fight for equality, and her legacy endures in the ongoing struggles for racial and gender justice. As the United States was thrust into the turmoil of the Civil War, Sojourner Truth's work expanded beyond speeches and public gatherings. Her advocacy evolved as she recognized the importance of the war in shaping the future of slavery and freedom in America. While the war was primarily a military conflict, Sojourner Truth saw it as a battle for the soul of the nation, one that would determine whether or not the ideals of equality and liberty would apply to all people, regardless of race or gender. Truth's involvement in the Civil War was multifaceted. She spent much of the war period working to support the Union cause, believing that the abolition of slavery was essential not only to the nation's survival, but also to its moral integrity. Her activism took on new urgency during these years, as she worked both behind the scenes and in the public eye to advocate for the rights of black people and women, particularly in relation to their roles in the war effort. One of Sojourner Truth's key contributions during the Civil War was her work with the Union Army. While she did not directly fight in the war, she played an instrumental role in recruiting black soldiers for the Union Army. Recognizing that the outcome of the war would have profound consequences for the future of enslaved people, she worked tirelessly to encourage black men to enlist. In her speeches, she made clear that the fight for freedom required the participation of all who sought justice, and she emphasized the power that black soldiers could wield in securing the future of their families and communities. In addition to recruiting soldiers, Sojourner Truth also worked to raise funds and provide supplies for the Union Army. She was particularly dedicated to supporting black troops, who often faced discrimination and were not treated with the same respect or resources as their white counterparts. Sojourner Truth's advocacy ensured that black soldiers had the supplies and support they needed to carry out their duties. As the war raged on, Sojourner Truth's efforts grew more focused on the practical needs of the newly freed people. She saw the war not only as a battle for the preservation of the Union, but as a critical moment to ensure the liberation of enslaved people. When President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, Sojourner Truth saw it as a crucial step toward freedom, though she knew it was only one part of the larger struggle for equality. The Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that all enslaved people in Confederate states were to be freed, was a monumental victory. But Truth understood that the true liberation of Black Americans would require more than just the abolition of slavery. It would require the full recognition of their rights as citizens. In the wake of the Emancipation Proclamation, Sojourner Truth intensified her work, focusing on ensuring that freed people were not left to fend for themselves in a society that still held deep-seated prejudices. Her efforts were particularly geared toward helping newly freed Black women and children who faced tremendous challenges in a society that continued to marginalize them. She worked to raise awareness about the difficulties that Black women faced and advocated for their inclusion in both the military and civil society. Though the Emancipation Proclamation had set the stage for the end of slavery, it did not automatically grant full civil rights to Black people. Sojourner Truth recognized that the fight for freedom was ongoing, and she remained a tireless advocate for the rights of all freed people. She continued to speak out about the need for equality, advocating for Black men and women to be treated as equals in every aspect of society. During this time, Sojourner Truth also began to address the complexities of gender in the fight for freedom. While her earlier work had focused on the intersection of race and gender, the Civil War provided a new platform for her to discuss the rights of women, particularly Black women, in the post-war world. She believed that Black women, having suffered the most under slavery, should be at the forefront of the struggle for full citizenship. Truth's understanding of freedom was expansive. It included not just the freedom from slavery, but the right to vote, the right to work, and the right to live without fear of discrimination or violence. As the Civil War came to a close, Sojourner Truth's work remained centered on ensuring that Black people, both men and women, would be integrated fully into American society as equals. The end of the war did not mean the end of the struggle, and Truth continued to use her voice to fight for justice. She knew that the legal abolition of slavery was just the beginning of a much longer journey toward full civil rights for Black Americans. Sojourner Truth's involvement in the Civil War and her support for the Emancipation Proclamation solidified her place as one of the most important figures in the abolitionist movement. She had used her voice and her efforts to shape the course of history, not only advocating for freedom from slavery, but also for the recognition of the rights and dignity of Black people and women. Her work during the Civil War exemplified her commitment to justice and equality, and it helped lay the groundwork for the post-war Reconstruction era, which would continue the fight for civil rights. As the Civil War ended in 1865, and the nation was slowly beginning to rebuild in the aftermath of such a divisive and bloody conflict, Sojourner Truth shifted her focus toward a cause she had long been passionate about: the rights of women, particularly Black women. The Emancipation Proclamation had granted freedom to millions of enslaved Black men and women. But Sojourner Truth recognized that true freedom was not just about the end of slavery. It was about full recognition of citizenship and equality, including the right to vote, own property, and live without the chains of discrimination. For Sojourner Truth, the fight for women's rights was inseparable from her lifelong battle against slavery. She had long believed that freedom for women could not be achieved without the full recognition of their equality, not just to men, but to all human beings. Now, in the post-war era, she turned her attention towards securing legal and social rights for women, especially Black women who continued to face exclusion from both the abolitionist movement and the suffrage movement. One of the central goals of Truth's post-war activism was the right for women, particularly Black women, to vote. Truth was a staunch advocate for women's suffrage, understanding that voting was an essential part of securing equal rights. She believed that without the ability to vote, women would continue to be excluded from the political processes that shape their lives and would remain powerless in a society that sought to keep them marginalized. In the early years of the post-Civil War period, Sojourner Truth continued to attend women's rights conventions, where she spoke passionately about the need for the suffrage movement to embrace the rights of black women. At these gatherings, she advocated not only for the right to vote, but also for the right to work, own property, and fully participate in American society. Her speeches, while calm and methodical, were powerful in their call for justice, emphasizing the intersection of race and gender in the struggle for equality. One of the key moments in Sojourner Truth's advocacy for women's suffrage came during a speech at the National Women's Rights Convention in 1867. She eloquently argued that the struggle for women's rights could not ignore the rights of black women, and she fiercely challenged the racial prejudices within the suffrage movement. Many of the prominent suffragists at the time, such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, were more focused on securing the vote for white women, but Truth consistently pushed for the inclusion of black women in the conversation. Her Ain't I a Woman speech, delivered years earlier in Akron, Ohio, was a defining moment in her suffrage activism. She'd spoken to the inherent contradictions in how society viewed women, how black women in particular were denied the same rights as white women, despite working as hard or harder than their counterparts. She questioned how women could be seen as weaker than men when she herself had endured the most grueling of labours without the protection of the law or the support of society. Her words remained a clear challenge to the racial and gender-based inequalities that still existed after the Civil War. Despite her tireless advocacy, Sojourner Truth, like many other black women, faced significant challenges in pushing for suffrage rights in the post-Civil War era. While the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution had abolished slavery and granted citizenship to black Americans, they did not secure the right to vote for black people, especially black women. In 1869, after the passage of the 15th Amendment, which gave voting rights to black men, a heated debate broke out within the women's suffrage movement. Some suffragists, particularly Stanton and Anthony, believed that the vote should be granted to white women first, and that black men's suffrage could be addressed later. This exclusion of black women from the conversation deeply hurt Sojourner Truth, but she remained undeterred in her fight for equality. She recognized that the suffrage movement could not be successful without addressing the needs of black women, who continued to be oppressed by both racial and gender-based discrimination. Truth's work with the suffrage movement and her calls for black women's inclusion continued in her later years, though progress in this area would be slow. In the midst of her work for women's rights, Sojourner Truth also continued to advocate for the rights of formerly enslaved people, particularly in the Reconstruction period after the Civil War. While the legal end of slavery was a victory, she understood that the battle for equality was far from over. Formerly enslaved people, particularly women and children, faced new challenges in a society that still clung to racial prejudices. Sojourner Truth worked with the Freedmen's Bureau and other organizations to ensure that black people, especially women, received the support they needed to adjust to their new lives as free citizens. Sojourner Truth's role in these movements was not one of domination or spectacle. Rather, she worked tirelessly behind the scenes, advocating for social, political, and economic equality through practical means. Whether it was by delivering speeches, organizing support, or working with groups like the Freedmen's Bureau, she remained a steady, unyielding voice for justice. Despite being often sidelined in the broader suffrage and abolitionist movements, Sojourner Truth continued to push for the rights of all women, particularly those who were left out of the political process. As the 1870s came to a close, Sojourner Truth's life, which had been marked by decades of tireless advocacy, began to slow down. The years of speaking, travelling and fighting for justice had taken a toll on her health. Though she'd never been one to shy away from hard work, the effects of old age and physical strain gradually began to catch up with her. Despite the decline in her physical strength, Sojourner Truth remained steadfast in her dedication to the causes she held dear, continuing to be a voice for both racial and gender equality. In the mid-1870s, Sojourner Truth's health began to deteriorate, and she moved to Battle Creek, Michigan, where she lived with her daughter, Sophie, and granddaughter. This change of location marked the beginning of a quieter phase in her life. Although she had stepped back from the constant travelling and speaking engagements that had defined much of her earlier years, her sense of purpose and commitment to justice never wavered. Though Truth had become less active in public advocacy, she remained an important figure in both the African American and women's rights communities. People still looked to her for guidance and wisdom, and she continued to offer advice and moral support to those who sought it. Even in her final years, Sojourner Truth's influence was still felt, and she remained a symbol of perseverance and strength for those who continued to fight for equality. By this time, Sojourner Truth had become somewhat of a national icon, not just for her abolitionist work, but for her unrelenting push for women's rights. However, the physical toll of her activism, her long years of public speaking, travelling and advocating, had taken its toll on her health. Sojourner Truth had spent much of her life living in difficult circumstances, and now, in her later years, she faced the physical consequences of those hardships. Her health began to decline noticeably. She suffered from arthritis, which caused her pain and limited her mobility. Despite these challenges, she maintained a sense of calm and resilience, never allowing her physical limitations to deter her from continuing her advocacy. She still made occasional public appearances, though she could no longer speak or travel as frequently as she once had. Even in her declining health, she remained a steady presence, offering wisdom and guidance to those who continued the fight for equality. As Sojourner Truth's health continued to deteriorate, she reflected on the achievements of her life. She had lived through some of the most transformative periods in American history, and though she had not seen full racial and gender equality in her lifetime, she was proud of the progress that had been made. She had been a tireless advocate for the abolition of slavery, the enfranchisement of women, and the basic human rights of all people, regardless of race or gender. Though there was still much work to be done, Sojourner Truth had laid the foundation for future generations to build upon. During these final years, Sojourner Truth also turned inward, reflecting on her personal journey. She had seen the country change in ways that she had only dreamed of in her earlier years. The institution of slavery had been abolished, and women's suffrage was gaining momentum, though it would still be decades before the vote was granted to all women. Sojourner Truth was proud of the progress that had been made, but she knew that the fight for equality would continue. Her work, she understood, was part of a long tradition of struggle, one that would continue long after her passing. In 1881, Sojourner Truth's health had declined to the point where she could no longer continue with her public work. She spent her final years in a more private, reflective state, resting and spending time with her family. Despite the quiet in her final years, Sojourner Truth remained a beloved figure, known for her unwavering commitment to justice and her profound impact on the abolitionist and women's rights movements. Her last years were not marked by grand speeches or large rallies, but by a quiet, dignified reflection on her life's work. She continued to write and speak on occasion, offering her thoughts on the continuing struggles for freedom and equality. She remained a deeply spiritual woman, finding peace in her faith as she faced the final chapter of her life. On November the 26th, 1883, Sojourner Truth passed away at the age of 86. She died peacefully in her home in Battle Creek, Michigan, surrounded by family. Her passing marked the end of a remarkable life, one that had changed the course of history and inspired generations of activists who would continue the work she'd started. Though Sojourner Truth had left the physical world, her legacy remained. Her tireless advocacy for the abolition of slavery, women's rights, and racial equality would continue to shape the movements of the 20th century and beyond. Sojourner Truth's voice, once so strong and clear, had become a quiet, steady force in the struggle for justice, a force that would continue to resonate long after her passing. Sojourner Truth's passing in 1883 marked the end of a remarkable life, one that had been dedicated to the pursuit of justice, equality, and human dignity. Though her body was no longer present, the work she'd begun continued to echo across the generations. Her contributions to the abolition of slavery, the women's suffrage movement, and the broader fight for civil rights would not be forgotten. Sojourner Truth's life became a foundation upon which many others would build their own efforts toward equality. In the years immediately following her death, Sojourner Truth's name remained associated with the key struggles of her time. Her contributions to the abolitionist movement in particular were widely recognized. Truth had been one of the most powerful voices calling for the end of slavery, and her speeches and advocacy had played an important role in shaping public opinion. Though the legal abolition of slavery had been achieved with the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865, the struggle for equality was far from over. One of the key aspects of Sojourner Truth's legacy was her insistence on the intersectionality of the struggles for racial and gender equality. While she's often remembered for her role in the abolitionist movement, she also made significant contributions to the fight for women's rights. Truth's "Ain't I a Woman?" speech remains a defining moment in the history of both the women's suffrage movement and the civil rights movement. Her challenge to the idea that women were weaker than men, and her bold assertion that black women in particular had been denied the recognition they deserved, resonated with generations of activists who followed her. Truth's influence continued to grow in the decades following her death, as the civil rights movement gained momentum in the early 20th century. Figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X carried forward the fight for racial equality, often invoking the names of those who had come before them. Sojourner Truth's legacy as an unwavering advocate for justice inspired them, as well as countless others, to continue pushing for change in a society still deeply divided by race. In the women's suffrage movement, Truth's contributions were similarly celebrated. While her name was not as widely known as those of Susan B., Anthony or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, her advocacy for black women's rights within the suffrage movement gained recognition in the years following her death. As the fight for women's suffrage continued into the 20th century, Truth's message that women of all races must be included in the movement remained relevant. The passing of the 19th Amendment in 1920, granting women the right to vote, was a victory. But Truth's insistence on intersectionality reminded activists that the struggle was not yet complete, as black women, especially in the South, faced significant barriers to voting. Throughout the 20th century, Sojourner Truth's name became synonymous with courage, resilience, and activism. Her legacy was celebrated during Black History Month, and her story continued to be passed down through generations, inspiring new activists in the ongoing fight for civil rights and gender equality. Truth's work laid the foundation for a future in which the full equality of all people, regardless of race or gender, could be pursued. In more recent years, Truth's legacy has been revisited in the context of contemporary social justice movements. As the fight for racial justice and gender equality continues, her life serves as a powerful reminder of the ongoing struggle for freedom and equality. Sojourner Truth's voice, once heard clearly in the abolitionist and suffrage movements, is now echoed by new generations calling for justice in the face of systemic racism, gender inequality, and oppression. One of the most enduring aspects of Sojourner Truth's legacy is her ability to speak truth to power. She used her voice, her experience, and her faith to advocate for what she believed in, and she did so with unwavering conviction. She did not wait for permission to speak. She claimed her right to be heard, and in doing so inspired others to do the same. Sojourner Truth's impact has also been recognized in the arts and culture. Her life has been depicted in books, plays, films, and songs, and she is remembered not only as a historical figure but as a symbol of the power of speaking out against injustice. Her strength, her voice, and her legacy continue to inspire those who strive to make the world a more just and equitable place. In 2009, Sojourner Truth was even honored by the United States Postal Service, with the issuance of a commemorative stamp, further solidifying her place in American history. She remains an iconic figure, representing the tireless fight for justice and equality that continues to shape the nation today. While Sojourner Truth may no longer be physically present, her legacy lives on. The ideals she championed, freedom, equality, and the inherent dignity of all people, continue to guide the work of activists and ordinary people alike, who follow in her footsteps as they work toward a more just and equitable world. Sojourner Truth's voice, once loud and clear in the face of oppression, now echoes through the corridors of history, inspiring all who strive to make the world a better place for everyone. Though Sojourner Truth passed away in 1883, her influence reverberates throughout modern history, particularly within movements for racial justice, women's rights, and civil rights. Her life, filled with the quiet but unyielding pursuit of justice, continues to serve as a beacon for those who seek to challenge inequality in its many forms. Truth's voice, though no longer physically present, echoes through the ongoing struggles for freedom and equality, reminding us that the fight she began is far from over. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Sojourner Truth's legacy has been woven into the fabric of both the feminist and civil rights movements. Her insistence on the intersectionality of race and gender has become a cornerstone of modern-day social justice work. Today's activists, particularly those in movements such as Black Lives Matter and Time's Up, continue to draw inspiration from Truth's message that the struggles for racial justice and gender equality are inherently linked and cannot be separated. One of the key reasons Sojourner Truth remains relevant is her unwavering commitment to equality, regardless of race, gender, or background. She advocated for the rights of black women at a time when both the abolitionist and women's suffrage movements often overlooked their needs. Her famous "Ain't I a Woman" speech is still referenced today, as it directly challenges the intersection of racism and sexism. In today's conversation surrounding feminism, intersectionality, and racial justice, Truth's words continue to resonate, offering a powerful reminder that justice for one group cannot come at the expense of another. In the present day, Truth's legacy is also felt in the global feminist movement, where her pioneering efforts for black women's suffrage and inclusion have inspired countless others. She set the stage for later generations of women, particularly women of colour, to demand equal rights, not as an afterthought, but as a central part of the struggle for gender equality. As women across the world continue to fight for equal pay, reproductive rights, and an end to gender-based violence, they do so with Sojourner Truth's legacy firmly in mind. Her life and activism remain a constant reminder that the fight for women's rights is inextricably linked to the fight for racial justice. In the realm of racial justice, Sojourner Truth's influence also endures. Her tireless work in the abolitionist movement laid the foundation for future leaders who would continue to challenge the systems of racial inequality in America. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, which brought about significant legal and societal changes, owes much to the groundwork laid by Truth and others like her. Leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X drew from the same well of determination that Sojourner Truth had tapped into. Her advocacy for the dignity of black Americans and her fight against institutional racism continue to resonate in today's calls for justice in the face of police brutality, voter suppression, and systemic discrimination. In modern times, Sojourner Truth's life is studied and celebrated in schools, universities, and cultural institutions. Her contributions to both the abolitionist and women's rights movements are integral parts of American history. In 2009, Truth was honored with a commemorative stamp issued by the United States Postal Service, further solidifying her place in the national consciousness. Each year, Black History Month provides an opportunity for people to reflect on the struggles of figures like Sojourner Truth and to recognize how her tireless work paved the way for future progress in the fight for equality. Moreover, Truth's legacy lives on through literature, art, and performance. Her life story is told through books, plays, and documentaries, many of which highlight her contributions to the feminist and abolitionist movements. Artists continue to draw inspiration from her life, creating works that seek to capture her resilience and strength. In modern cinema and literature, she's often portrayed as a symbol of hope and empowerment, inspiring audiences to continue fighting for a world that embraces the ideals of freedom, justice, and equality. As we look to the future, Sojourner Truth's legacy remains as relevant as ever. Her belief in the power of personal agency, her courage in the face of adversity, and her unrelenting commitment to justice continue to inspire individuals and movements worldwide. Her work laid the groundwork for the women's rights, civil rights, and labor movements of the 20th century, and those same struggles continue today. In a world where racial and gender inequality still exist, Sojourner Truth's words remind us that the fight is ongoing. Her legacy, rooted in both her personal experiences and her unwavering belief in justice, encourages us all to continue the work she began, whether through the continued struggle for voting rights, equal pay, access to education, or an end to systemic racism. The essence of Sojourner Truth activism remains a guiding light for those who seek a better, more just world. Sojourner Truth's contributions to the abolitionist and women's rights movements have left an indelible mark on history, yet her impact extends far beyond the time in which she lived. As the years passed, her message of equality, justice, and human dignity continued to resonate with new generations of activists, shaping the course of movements for civil rights and gender equality. Sojourner Truth's legacy remains alive in the hearts and minds of those who continue to fight for freedom and justice today. In the 20th century, Truth's work and words continued to inspire key figures in the civil rights movement. Leaders like Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and Malcolm X carried forward the fight for racial equality, and Sojourner Truth's legacy served as a foundation upon which they built their advocacy. Truth had long argued that the fight for freedom could not be achieved by separating issues of race and gender. This message became a cornerstone of later movements. As civil rights activists confronted the institutionalized racism of the time, they often invoked the names of the pioneers who had laid the groundwork for their work, Sojourner Truth among them. Her example of courage in the face of oppression and her tireless commitment to justice became an inspiration for a generation determined to end segregation and secure the rights of African Americans. Similarly, Truth's advocacy for women's rights found a renewed voice in the 20th century, especially during the women's liberation movement of the 1960s and 1970s. Sojourner Truth's fight for equality did not stop at the suffrage movement. She had also spoken against the economic and social constraints imposed on women, particularly women of colour. Her challenge to the idea that women were weak or incapable, particularly in her "Ain't I a Woman" speech, continued to inspire activists fighting for equal pay, reproductive rights, and freedom from gender-based violence. Black feminism owes much to Sojourner Truth's example. She had long argued that the suffrage movement must embrace the concerns of black women who faced not only the oppression of slavery, but the additional burden of racial discrimination. In this way, Truth's life laid the groundwork for future feminist movements, which emphasized the importance of race, class, and gender in the fight for equality. Her understanding of intersectionality, that one's race, gender, and social status were interconnected and could not be addressed separately, became an essential framework for feminist thought in the 20th and 21st centuries. Throughout the civil rights movement, activists drew upon Truth's life and words. For example, during the Montgomery bus boycott, Rosa Parks invoked Truth's spirit of resistance when she refused to give up her seat on the bus. Parks, like Truth, was defying a system that sought to keep black people in their place. Parks' act of defiance was not only a stand against segregation, but also an embodiment of Truth's lifelong fight for justice. Sojourner Truth had shown that the strength of a single person's resolve could change the course of history, and Parks' quiet strength on that bus in 1955 was an extension of Truth's legacy. In the decades that followed, Sojourner Truth continued to be a touchstone for those advocating for change. Black Lives Matter, the modern-day movement focused on ending police violence against black people, similarly draws inspiration from Truth's fight against both racial and gender oppression. Truth's advocacy for the recognition of black women's voices remains deeply relevant today, as women of color continue to face intersectional challenges that are too often overlooked within both mainstream feminism and civil rights activism. Truth's influence also extends to the realm of labor rights and economic justice, areas that she championed throughout her life. She often spoke about the need for black women to have economic independence and the right to fair wages. Today, Truth's legacy is alive in the ongoing fight for equal pay and better working conditions, particularly for women of color, who are often underpaid and undervalued in the workforce. Her life serves as a reminder that true freedom is not just about legal rights, but also about the ability to support oneself and one's family in a fair and just system. In the LGBTQ+ movement, Truth's emphasis on the intersectionality of race, gender, and social justice continues to influence contemporary activism. The struggle for equal rights for LGBTQ+ individuals, particularly for transgender people of color, echoes Sojourner Truth's own advocacy for marginalized groups. Her understanding that the fight for equality must encompass all forms of oppression resonates with those who work to ensure that the rights of transgender people, as well as all gender and sexual minorities, are recognized and protected. The continued relevance of Sojourner Truth's legacy is reflected in how her life is celebrated today. Schools, universities, and cultural institutions continue to study her contributions, ensuring that future generations understand the profound impact she had on American society and the world. In 2009, the United States Postal Service honored her with a commemorative stamp, forever cementing her place in American history. Sojourner Truth's image, a symbol of resilience and unwavering justice, continues to inspire people from all walks of life. Even in the face of modern challenges, Truth's call for equality remains vital. Her example reminds us that the fight for justice is ongoing, and that we must continue to challenge the systems of oppression that still exist today. Whether through the fight for racial justice, women's rights, LGBTQ+ equality, or economic justice, Sojourner Truth's words continue to guide us. Sojourner Truth's legacy has not only endured through social justice movements, but has also left an indelible mark on art, literature, and public memory. Her life and work have been celebrated and immortalized in various forms of expression, ensuring that her contributions to the abolitionist, women's rights, and civil rights movements continue to inspire and resonate with new generations. In the early 20th century, Truth's name was increasingly recognized as one of the great figures in American history, particularly in the context of Black history and women's history. In 1911, a statue of Sojourner Truth was erected in Florence, Massachusetts, where she'd lived during the 19th century. This monument, which features her standing proudly with a raised hand, symbolizing her strength and resolve, became a tangible reminder of the legacy she left behind. This early recognition set the stage for further cultural commemorations in the decades to come. Sojourner Truth's life and work have also been the subject of numerous biographies, memoirs, and academic studies. Scholars and historians have worked to ensure that her story is passed down with accuracy and reverence, recognizing her pivotal role in the American struggle for justice. These writings have provided new generations of readers with access to Truth's speeches, personal reflections, and the full scope of her activism. Her words, particularly her powerful speeches like "Ain't I a Woman?" continue to be quoted in classrooms and among activists, serving as both a historical record and a timeless call for justice. Her story has also been a source of literary inspiration. Truth's life has been explored in novels, poems, and plays, with writers drawing on her strength and resilience to create works that speak to modern audiences. For instance, the play Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman?, written by Tracy Jones, presents her life story through the lens of her famous speech, making her message accessible to contemporary audiences in a dramatic form. Such works contribute to the broader cultural understanding of Truth's impact on history, and continue to honor her as a central figure in both American history and the global struggle for justice. In addition to the written word, music has been another way in which Truth's legacy is celebrated. Over the years, Truth has been the subject of songs and musical compositions that pay tribute to her enduring influence. Folk music, spirituals, and contemporary songs have been used to convey the themes of freedom and equality that Truth championed. Her story has resonated across different musical genres, becoming a source of inspiration for musicians who continue to carry her message forward in the fight for racial justice and gender equality. Sojourner Truth has also been honored through public commemorations. In 2009, the U.S. Postal Service issued a commemorative stamp in her honor, solidifying her place in American history. The stamp, which depicts her serene yet powerful image, has become a symbol of her contributions to the abolitionist movement and the women's suffrage movement. The image of Truth on a postage stamp reflects her status as an iconic figure in the United States and recognizes the importance of her efforts in the broader context of civil rights. In 2008, Truth was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame, further acknowledging her role in the women's rights movement. Her inclusion in the Hall of Fame highlights the centrality of her contributions to the broader fight for gender equality, emphasizing her unwavering commitment to ensuring that women of all races, particularly black women, were afforded the same rights and opportunities as their male counterparts. This recognition helps ensure that her contributions continue to be honored and that her legacy endures as a guiding light for future generations of activists. Throughout the 21st century, Sojourner Truth's life and work continue to be celebrated in museums and cultural institutions across the United States. Exhibits dedicated to her, often found in institutions like the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, share her story and its impact on social justice movements. These exhibits, which highlight Truth's life, her role in the abolitionist movement, and her fight for women's rights, continue to educate visitors about her contributions to the shaping of American society. Sojourner Truth's voice has transcended the time in which she lived, becoming a symbol of resistance, courage, and unwavering faith in the face of adversity. Her name is invoked not only in historical context, but also in contemporary movements such as #MeToo, Black Lives Matter, and other social justice causes that fight for the rights of marginalized people. Her commitment to intersectionality, her ability to confront both racial and gender depression, serves as an enduring example for modern-day activists. In today's world, Sojourner Truth is often invoked during moments of racial injustice, particularly as a reminder that true equality is a collective struggle that involves not just black people or women, but all oppressed groups, her message of universal justice, while rooted in the struggles of her time, resonates deeply with those who continue to fight against systemic racism, sexism, and inequality. Her influence extends beyond the United States as well. Sojourner Truth's story is shared internationally, inspiring global movements for women's empowerment and racial equality. Truth's work exemplifies the interconnectedness of struggles for justice, and her life serves as a reminder that the fight for equality is universal and ongoing. Her legacy has become a symbol of the power of one person's voice to change the course of history, and her story continues to inspire people around the world who seek to create a more just and equitable society. Sojourner Truth's influence continues to reverberate through modern-day social justice movements. As the fight for racial equality, gender justice, and civil rights evolves in the 21st century, her legacy remains foundational to the ongoing struggle for freedom and equality. Truth's uncompromising stand on the intersectionality of race, gender, and class resonates deeply within contemporary activism, shaping movements that aim to confront systemic inequality in ways that mirror her own approach. In particular, Sojourner Truth's advocacy for the rights of Black women has become increasingly relevant in today's discussions of intersectionality, a term coined by scholar Kimberlé Crenshaw to describe the ways in which race, gender, and other forms of identity intersect and contribute to unique experiences of discrimination. Truth's work, which straddled both the abolitionist and women's rights movements, laid the groundwork for the modern understanding of how race and gender cannot be separated in the pursuit of equality. Modern movements such as Black Lives Matter draw upon Truth's assertion that justice for one group cannot come at the expense of others. Black Lives Matter, founded in 2013, is not just a response to police brutality, but a wider call for the recognition of Black dignity, equality, and human rights. Much like Sojourner Truth, the movement emphasizes the need to address the intersectional nature of oppression. Black women, in particular, face unique forms of violence and discrimination that often go unaddressed in mainstream conversations about civil rights. Truth's early advocacy for Black women's voices to be heard within both the suffrage and abolitionist movements helped lay the groundwork for today's activism that highlights the need to center Black women in social justice efforts. Truth's call for social justice extended beyond issues of racial and gender inequality. It also encompassed economic justice. In her life, she championed economic independence for Black women, who were often excluded from economic opportunities and fair wages. In modern activism, Truth's message has been echoed by those advocating for equal pay, workplace rights, and the empowerment of women and marginalized groups in the labor force. Contemporary labor rights movements continue to challenge the historical and ongoing exclusion of women, especially women of color, from fair employment practices, and they draw strength from Truth's example of demanding dignity and respect for all. Workers, Truth's faith-based activism also serves as a model for modern movements that use faith and spirituality as tools for social change. Throughout her life, Sojourner Truth was deeply committed to her Christian beliefs, which gave her the strength and moral clarity to fight for justice. Her activism was grounded in her faith, and she believed that her work was part of a divine plan to promote peace and equality. In today's world, many activists and faith-based organizations continue to draw on spiritual principles to guide their work. Sojourner Truth's life is a powerful example of how faith can be a catalyst for social change. In the fight for women's rights, Sojourner Truth's advocacy for universal suffrage, including her call for Black women's inclusion in the suffrage movement, continues to influence contemporary efforts. The Women's March of 2017, which was one of the largest demonstrations in US history, was a direct reflection of the ongoing struggle for gender equality. Sojourner Truth's role in laying the foundation for the inclusion of women of all races in the suffrage movement is an integral part of the story of women's rights in America. Today, activists continue to fight for reproductive rights, equal pay, access to healthcare, and freedom from gender-based violence, all of which were central to Truth's activism. LGBTQ+ movements also owe a debt to Truth's work. Sojourner Truth's commitment to equality extended beyond race and gender to include all people who faced oppression. Her advocacy for the rights of marginalized groups laid the foundation for future movements advocating for the rights of LGBTQ+ individuals. In particular, Truth's approach to intersectionality, acknowledging the unique struggles faced by individuals who belong to multiple marginalized groups, has influenced the modern LGBTQ+ movement's efforts to address the specific challenges faced by transgender people of color who experience compounded forms of discrimination. Sojourner Truth's legacy is also present in the ongoing fight against racial profiling and police violence, as seen in the work of groups like Campaign Zero and the Movement for Black Lives. These modern movements, which seek to address systemic racism within law enforcement and the criminal justice system, are deeply connected to Sojourner Truth's lifelong struggle for freedom, justice, and dignity. Her message of resilience in the face of oppression continues to be a source of inspiration for those advocating for reforms to dismantle oppressive systems. As the world continues to grapple with inequality, discrimination, and injustice, Sojourner Truth's work remains a guiding light for contemporary social justice movements. Her refusal to accept the status quo and her insistence on equality for all people serve as powerful examples of what it means to be a leader in the fight for change. Sojourner Truth's life continues to serve as a reminder that the work of creating a more just and equitable society is ongoing and requires the effort of everyone who is willing to stand up for what is right. Through her example, Sojourner Truth has shown that no matter the challenge, no matter the resistance, it is the quiet, steadfast commitment to justice that creates lasting change. Today's activists, from those pushing for racial equality to those fighting for gender justice, continue to build on the foundation she laid, making her an enduring figure in the struggle for social transformation. Sojourner Truth's powerful legacy has transcended the pages of history, finding expression in various forms of popular culture, from the stage to film, literature to music. Truth's life and work continue to inspire artistic representations that keep her story alive for contemporary audiences. As a figure who defied the limitations placed upon her by society, Truth's portrayal in popular culture often highlights her unyielding spirit, her role in social justice movements, and her status as an enduring symbol of resilience. One of the earliest and most significant cultural representations of Sojourner Truth came in the form of theatre. Truth's life has been the subject of numerous plays, which dramatize her experiences, struggles, and triumphs. These plays have allowed audiences to engage with her story on a visceral level, bringing her words and actions to life through performance. The theatre has long been a space for reflecting on the struggles for freedom, and Truth's story is no exception. One notable example is Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman?, a play written by Tracy Jones that was performed in the 1980s. This play focuses on the iconic Ain't I a Woman? Speech delivered by Truth at the 1851 Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio. The speech, which challenged the dual oppression faced by black women, both as women and as black individuals, remains one of her most important contributions to the women's suffrage and civil rights movements. The play draws on Truth's fierce advocacy for equality, illustrating her unique ability to speak to both the issues of race and gender with equal clarity and force. Film adaptations have also helped to immortalize Sojourner Truth's life. Though Truth herself did not live to see the rise of cinema, she's been depicted in various films and documentaries over the years. These portrayals bring her life to the screen, allowing viewers to engage with her story in a visual and immersive way. Documentaries in particular have been instrumental in sharing the historical context of Truth's work, while dramatizations in film continue to explore the nuances of her character and her impact on the world. One such documentary, Sojourner Truth: A Life of Struggle and Strength, aired on PBS as part of its American Experience series. It offered an in-depth exploration of her life and work, providing insights into both her personal struggles and her public advocacy. The documentary illustrated how Truth's activism shaped the course of history and continues to influence social justice movements today. Documentaries like this have helped preserve her legacy for new generations, educating the public about her contributions to the abolitionist movement, women's rights, and civil rights. Biographical films have also featured Sojourner Truth, such as the Sojourner Truth Story, 1997, a dramatized depiction of Truth's life, focusing on key moments in her journey from slavery to freedom and her subsequent activism. Though fictionalized, these films attempt to capture the essence of Truth's character, her resilience, her unwavering faith, and her commitment to justice. Films like these allow viewers to see Truth not just as a historical figure, but as a living, breathing individual who changed the world with her actions and words. In addition to film and theatre, Sojourner Truth's influence can be seen in literature. Countless books have been written about her life, from historical biographies to children's books that aim to introduce younger generations to her remarkable story. Sojourner Truth: A Life, written by Nell Irvin Painter, is one such well-regarded biography that explores Truth's personal and public life in detail. These literary works examine Truth's role in the abolitionist and suffrage movements, while also delving into her spiritual journey, showing how faith and activism intertwined in her quest for justice. Moreover, Truth's life has been the subject of poetry and songs. Writers and musicians have found inspiration in her unwavering commitment to human rights, creating works that honor her enduring influence. Her speeches and writings have been adapted into musical performances, and songs written in tribute to her continue to highlight the importance of her contributions to equality. These artistic representations of Sojourner Truth have helped keep her legacy alive, ensuring that future generations are reminded of her contributions to the ongoing struggle for justice. In the present day, Sojourner Truth's image remains a powerful symbol. Her portrait, which depicts her with a dignified gaze, is often used in educational materials, public spaces, and commemorations. Truth's face is familiar to many, not only because of her pivotal role in history, but also because her image represents the resilience and strength of those who fight against oppression. Truth's legacy is also reflected in the names of streets, schools, and public buildings across the United States. From Sojourner Truth houses providing safe spaces for homeless individuals to Sojourner Truth schools in various cities, her name continues to serve as a reminder of her contributions to society. These institutions keep her name alive in the public consciousness and ensure that her message of equality, justice, and perseverance continues to inspire those who come after her. In today's world, Sojourner Truth's influence is felt in the ongoing work of activists and social justice movements. From #MeToo to Black Lives Matter, her legacy serves as a guiding light for those who continue to fight for racial and gender equality. Her life reminds us that the work of dismantling systems of oppression is ongoing, and that true justice can only be achieved when everyone's rights are equally recognized and protected. Sojourner Truth's legacy extends beyond activism and cultural recognition. It has also deeply influenced the field of education. Her life, work, and words continue to be studied and celebrated in classrooms, museums, and academic settings, ensuring that her contributions to both the abolitionist and women's rights movements are passed down to future generations. Sojourner Truth's impact on education is profound, as her story is used to teach lessons not only about history, but about courage, resilience, and the fight for justice. In the United States, Sojourner Truth's story is included in the curriculum of many schools, particularly in history and social studies courses. Students across the country learn about her role in the abolitionist movement and her advocacy for women's suffrage, with her "Ain't I a Woman" speech often being a key point of study. Teachers use her speeches, letters, and biography to help students understand the complexities of slavery, race relations, and the intersection of gender in the 19th century. One of the reasons Sojourner Truth's story is so impactful in educational settings is because it provides an opportunity to discuss not just historical events, but also moral and philosophical questions. Truth's life presents the question of what it means to be free, both physically and mentally, and how one can overcome systemic oppression through resilience and activism. Her unwavering commitment to justice offers a powerful example for students, especially as they learn about the struggles for civil rights and gender equality that continue in the modern world. Sojourner Truth's influence extends to higher education, where her life is a subject of study in a variety of academic fields, including history, gender studies, African American studies, and philosophy. Scholars continue to analyze and debate her contributions to both the abolitionist and suffrage movements, often highlighting her work as foundational to the intersectionality theory that would emerge in the 20th century. Her role in advocating for the rights of black women in particular has made her a key figure in the development of feminist thought and race theory. Many universities and academic institutions across the country offer courses that explore the ways in which Sojourner Truth's activism shaped American history and continues to influence contemporary discussions on race, gender, and equality. Students and scholars engage with her speeches and writings, using them to analyze the social, political, and cultural shifts of the 19th century and their continued relevance in the 21st century. These academic settings serve as spaces for critical thought, where Truth's life is not only studied, but also used as a model for understanding the ongoing struggles of justice. In addition to formal education, museums and cultural institutions play a key role in preserving Sojourner Truth's legacy. Museums dedicated to African American history, such as the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., feature exhibits on Truth, detailing her contributions to both the abolitionist and suffrage movements. These exhibits often include photographs, documents, and artifacts that bring her story to life for visitors. The Smithsonian's collection, for example, contains items that illustrate her life as an activist, including personal letters, speeches, and even reproductions of her famous 1851 "Ain't I a Woman" speech. Other museums, like the Sojourner Truth Memorial in Florence, Massachusetts, house artifacts related to Truth's life, providing a tangible connection to her history. The memorial is a place where visitors can learn more about her personal journey from enslavement to freedom, her spiritual awakening, and her advocacy for social change. These physical spaces serve as important reminders of Sojourner Truth's profound impact, allowing new generations to engage with her legacy in a meaningful way. Truth's story is also central to the work of various historical societies and foundations dedicated to preserving African American history. Organizations such as the Sojourner Truth Institute in Michigan continue to promote her life's work through educational programming, community outreach, and academic research. These institutions not only focus on Truth's contributions, but also encourage dialogue about her relevance to contemporary social justice movements. In addition to museums and schools, libraries also play a significant role in preserving Sojourner Truth's legacy. Many public and university libraries offer access to collections of Truth's writings, speeches, and biographies. These resources provide students, researchers, and activists with the materials necessary to explore Truth's ideas and their continued importance. Libraries also host events, lectures, and exhibits that celebrate Truth's life, often in collaboration with other educational institutions and cultural organizations. Sojourner Truth's legacy is also celebrated during Black History Month, an annual event dedicated to recognizing the contributions of African Americans to history and culture. Her life is often a focal point during these celebrations, with events organized to educate the public about her achievements and the lasting impact of her activism. Educational programs during Black History Month frequently highlight Sojourner Truth's fight for freedom, equality, and justice, ensuring that her message continues to inspire a new generation of activists. As Sojourner Truth's story continues to be passed down through educational institutions, public commemorations, and scholarly research, her influence remains undiminished. Her courage, resilience, and commitment to justice serve as powerful tools for teaching the ongoing work of social change. From schools to museums, libraries to academic settings, Sojourner Truth's legacy lives on as a beacon of hope and a reminder that the fight for equality is never over. Sojourner Truth's legacy continues to resonate deeply within contemporary social justice movements, where her unwavering commitment to racial and gender equality remains a touchstone for those fighting against systemic oppression. Truth's life and activism laid the groundwork for future generations of leaders who now carry the mantle of her work, using her example to shape their own fight for freedom and justice. Her influence is felt in the Black Lives Matter movement, the ongoing struggle for women's rights, and the broader fight for human rights. One of the most significant ways Sojourner Truth's legacy shapes contemporary movements is through her emphasis on intersectionality. Truth was one of the earliest figures to understand that the fight for justice could not be compartmentalized. She recognized that issues of race, gender, and class were intricately connected, and that liberation could not be fully realized unless all forms of oppression were addressed simultaneously. Her "Ain't I a Woman" speech challenged the prevailing notions of womanhood by reminding people that Black women, in particular, had long been excluded from both feminist discourse and the abolitionist movement. This call for intersectional justice is echoed today in movements such as Black Lives Matter and #MeToo, which fight against both racial and gender-based oppression. Sojourner Truth's advocacy for the rights of Black women was groundbreaking, and her work serves as an inspiration to modern-day activists who fight against the intersectional discrimination faced by marginalized people. Black Lives Matter, for example, emerged in response to systemic police violence against Black communities. The movement has grown to highlight the particular violence experienced by Black women and transgender individuals who are often excluded from broader conversations about racial justice. Truth's lifelong dedication to ensuring that Black women's voices were heard in the fight for justice continues to shape the direction of contemporary activism. In the women's rights movement, Sojourner Truth's influence remains profound. While Truth's name may not always be included in the same breath as Susan B. Anthony or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, her advocacy for universal suffrage, which included the enfranchisement of Black women, has become increasingly relevant. The feminist movement of the 1960s and 1970s, as well as the modern Women's March movement, has drawn from Truth's example of inclusion, emphasizing the need to center the voices of Black women and other women of color in the conversation about gender equality. In particular, Black feminism owes a great deal to Sojourner Truth. Black feminists such as Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, and Kimberlé Crenshaw have built on the intersectional foundation laid by Truth, emphasizing how race, class, gender, and sexuality intersect to produce unique experiences of oppression for Black women. Truth's call for the equal treatment of Black women in both the abolitionist and suffrage movements highlights the ongoing struggle to include Black women's experiences in mainstream feminist and civil rights discourse. Truth's impact on labor rights is also evident in the work of modern-day activists who continue to fight for the rights of working-class women and marginalized communities. Throughout her life, Sojourner Truth advocated for the economic independence of women, particularly Black women, who are often excluded from fair wages and employment opportunities. Today, Truth's legacy lives on in the work of organizations like Fight for $15, which advocates for a living wage for low-income workers, and the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, which represents many workers in the service industry. These movements, like Truth's own work, aim to address both the economic disparities and systemic barriers that prevent marginalized groups from achieving equality and dignity. In addition to these movements, Sojourner Truth's legacy is present in the continued struggle for reproductive rights. Truth, who spent much of her life advocating for women's ability to control their own bodies, is often invoked in discussions about reproductive justice, a framework that centers the experiences of Black women and other women of color in the fight for reproductive rights. Activists who focus on reproductive rights today are deeply influenced by Truth's call for the right to choose, not only in terms of reproduction, but also in terms of economic, social, and political freedom. Truth's influence also extends to the LGBTQ+ community, where her understanding of the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality continues to shape contemporary struggles. Transgender women of color who face the compounded impact of racial and gender discrimination find inspiration in Sojourner Truth's early calls for social inclusion and equality. Her legacy is a guiding light for LGBTQ+ activists working toward justice, particularly as issues of transgender rights, gender identity, and sexual orientation intersect with those of race and class in the fight for equality. As contemporary movements continue to push for racial justice, gender equality, and human rights, Sojourner Truth's life serves as a reminder that activism is not just about individual victories, but about building movements that are inclusive, intersectional, and committed to lasting systemic change. Her dedication to these principles, her belief that true justice can only be achieved when all people are free, remains a cornerstone for today's social justice work. Sojourner Truth's impact on modern activism is a testament to the power of one voice to change the course of history. Her faith, resilience, and unwavering commitment to justice continue to inspire those who fight for a more equitable world. As long as inequality persists, Truth's example will continue to guide the path toward a better future for all. Sojourner. Truth's activism was deeply intertwined with her spiritual journey. Her faith was a core component of her identity, and provided her with the strength and moral clarity to advocate for justice and equality. Truth's spirituality was not only a personal refuge but a guiding force in her life's work, propelling her to fight for the liberation of all people, particularly those who were oppressed. Her journey from slavery to freedom, both physically and spiritually, was shaped by her Christian faith, which influenced her approach to activism and the way she understood and responded to the world. Born Isabella Baumfree, Truth's early years were marked by the hardships of slavery. She spent much of her early life in brutal conditions and endured the separation from her family, but it was in these difficult moments that she began to seek solace in faith. As a young enslaved woman, she was exposed to Christianity, and the teachings of Jesus provided her with a sense of hope in the midst of suffering. Despite the harshness of her circumstances, Truth found comfort in the idea of divine justice and the belief that God had a plan for her life. When Truth escaped slavery and became a free woman, her faith deepened. She spent time reflecting on her personal spiritual journey and began to feel a strong calling to preach and spread the message of God's love and justice. In the 1820s, she had a spiritual awakening, during which she claimed to have heard God's voice telling her to go and preach the truth. This moment marked a significant turning point in Truth's life, as she began to see herself not just as a survivor of slavery, but as a vessel for God's will. Her faith gave her a sense of purpose, and she felt driven to advocate for the freedom of others, both spiritually and physically. In the early 1840s, Truth adopted the name Sojourner Truth to reflect her new mission as a preacher and advocate for social justice. She believed that God had chosen her to be a messenger, traveling the country to spread the word of freedom, equality, and justice. Her name, Sojourner, represented her calling to be a traveller, a wanderer who would go wherever she was needed to preach about God's truth. Truth, of course, symbolized her unwavering commitment to speaking honestly and openly about the struggles she had witnessed and endured, particularly the cruelty of slavery and the marginalization of women. Sojourner Truth's faith was not a passive or conventional form of spirituality. It was active and engaged, driving her to take action in the world. She believed that the fight for freedom and equality was an extension of her religious duty. She saw the abolition of slavery and the advancement of women's rights as part of the moral work that God had set before her. In her public speeches and writings, she frequently invoked her faith, using religious language to frame her activism and to appeal to her audiences. She believed that God's justice demanded the freedom of enslaved people and the full recognition of women's equality, and she felt compelled to speak out and act in accordance with these beliefs. One of Sojourner Truth's most famous moments came when she delivered her iconic "Ain't I a Woman" speech at the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio in 1851. In this speech, Truth directly addressed the intersection of race and gender, challenging the notion that women were weak or fragile, and asserting the strength of black women, particularly those who had suffered the oppression of both slavery and patriarchy. Her words, though simple and direct, carried a powerful message. "That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helped me into carriages or over mud puddles or gave me any best place. And ain't I a woman?" Her speech was framed within a larger moral and religious context as she called for justice for women of all races. By invoking her faith and the power of divine truth, she challenged the prevailing notions of womanhood, pointing out that black women had been excluded from mainstream discussions of gender equality. Truth's spirituality gave her the courage to make this bold statement, knowing that her activism was grounded in a higher moral purpose. Sojourner Truth's religious faith also shaped her understanding of suffering and human dignity. She viewed the hardships of slavery not as a sign of divine punishment, but as a test of endurance and a call to rise above the conditions imposed upon her. Her experiences in bondage only deepened her resolve to fight for the freedom of others, as she saw her own freedom as part of God's larger plan for justice in the world. She frequently spoke about the ways in which faith had sustained her, even during the darkest moments of her life. Her connection to faith also allowed her to build community with those who shared her beliefs. She worked closely with other abolitionists, many of whom were motivated by their Christian values. Together they formed a network of support that was grounded in religious conviction, but also driven by a shared commitment to social change. This religious community helped to amplify Truth's voice and provided her with the strength to continue her work, even when faced with resistance and hardship. In her later years, as Truth's health began to decline, her faith continued to be a source of solace. She found peace in the knowledge that her life had been spent in service to a higher cause. She believed that her work had been divinely inspired and that her struggle for freedom and justice was part of a greater moral mission. As she neared the end of her life, Sojourner Truth continued to reflect on the power of spirituality and faith as a foundation for social change. Knowing that her activism had left an indelible mark on the fight for freedom and equality, Sojourner Truth's life stands as a testament to the power of faith and how it can be harnessed to fuel social justice movements. Her unwavering belief in God's justice and her call for moral action continue to inspire people today, reminding us that the struggle for equality is not only a political or social fight, but also a deeply spiritual one. Sojourner Truth's legacy remains a central source of inspiration for contemporary activists who continue to fight for racial equality, gender justice, and human rights. Her life, marked by resilience in the face of oppression, Her powerful advocacy for black women and her commitment to intersectional justice serves as a guiding force for movements that strive to build a more just and equitable world. Truth's impact is especially felt in modern-day efforts to address systemic racism, gender-based violence, economic inequality, and social exclusion. In recent years, Truth's influence can be seen in movements like Black Lives Matter, which seeks to challenge police violence and systemic racism. Though Truth's advocacy occurred in a very different historical context, her emphasis on racial justice and her call for dignity and equality resonate strongly with modern-day activists working to dismantle oppressive systems. The struggle against police violence and racial profiling is a fight Truth would likely have joined, as her life's work was dedicated to confronting the dehumanization of black people, particularly black women, in America, just as she fought for the abolition of slavery. Modern-day activists continue her work by demanding an end to state-sanctioned violence and advocating for the full recognition of black humanity. Black Lives Matter has also drawn from Truth's central message that the fight for justice must be inclusive and intersectional, as Truth advocated for the rights of black women within both the abolitionist and suffrage movements. Black Lives Matter activists emphasized that the experiences of black women, trans individuals, and other marginalized groups cannot be overlooked in the fight for racial justice. Just as Truth rejected the notion that the struggles of black people and women were separate, contemporary activists continue to address the interconnectedness of race, gender, and class oppression. Sojourner Truth's legacy also lives on through the #MeToo movement, which combats sexual harassment and gender-based violence. Truth's "Ain't I a Woman" speech called attention to the particular suffering endured by black women, who are often excluded from both racial justice and women's rights movements. In much the same way, #MeToo highlights how women of colour, particularly black women, are disproportionately affected by sexual violence and harassment. Truth's assertion that black women's voices and experiences needed to be centred in discussions of gender justice is deeply relevant to this ongoing movement, which strives to give women of all races a platform to share their stories and demand accountability. Beyond movements centred specifically on race and gender, Sojourner Truth's life also serves as a model for today's broader fight for economic equality. Truth's advocacy for economic independence for black women, who are often excluded from employment opportunities and fair wages, parallels today's efforts to address the systemic economic inequalities that affect marginalized groups. The ongoing fight for a living wage, equal pay, and workers' rights draws from Truth's own commitment to ensuring that all people, regardless of their race or gender, have the right to economic dignity. Her life reminds us that true equality cannot be achieved without addressing the economic structures that perpetuate poverty and exclusion. Truth's impact is also seen in labour movements, particularly those advocating for fair wages and safe working conditions for women of colour. Activists today who fight for universal childcare, paid family leave, and better working conditions in industries that disproportionately employ women of colour, such as domestic work and service industries, are continuing the fight for economic justice that Sojourner Truth championed throughout her life. In addition, LGBTQ+ rights activists often turn to Sojourner Truth's life and legacy when advocating for the rights of transgender and gender non-conforming people. Sojourner Truth's radical challenge to the gender norms of her time, her call for equality and recognition of all women, regardless of race, echoes through the efforts of those working to secure equal rights for gender-diverse individuals. The struggle for transgender rights, particularly for black and gender non-conforming people of colour, continues to draw from Truth's call for equality for all people, no matter their race or gender expression. As these modern-day movements continue their work, Sojourner Truth's legacy reminds us that social justice cannot be achieved without a holistic approach to equality. one that recognizes the complexity of people's identities and experiences. The fight for freedom, dignity, and justice that she began is ongoing, and her work serves as both a model and a call to action. Truth's life exemplified a commitment to the belief that the rights of one group of people cannot be achieved at the expense of another. She understood that justice was not a zero-sum game. It was something to be fought for universally, for all. Today, Sojourner Truth's words continue to inspire and challenge activists across the globe. Her call for truth, justice, and freedom for all people is as relevant now as it was in her time. Whether it's in the streets demanding justice for Black lives, in the workplace advocating for equal pay and safe working conditions, or in the courts pushing for the protection of women's rights, Truth's spirit lives on. The continued relevance of Sojourner Truth's message reminds us that while progress has been made, there is still much work to be done. She dedicated her life to fighting for a better world, a world where people are judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin or their gender. As activists continue to struggle for these ideals today, Truth's legacy provides the guidance, strength, and inspiration needed to carry the fight forward. Sojourner Truth's life and work were foundational to the abolitionist movement in the United States. Her unique perspective as both a Black woman and a former enslaved person gave her a powerful voice in the fight to end slavery, one that carried great weight in both the abolitionist and women's rights circles. Her personal story of enslavement, escape, and eventual freedom was not just a testimony of survival, but a call to action, demanding that others take a stand against the inhumanity of slavery. As a former slave, Truth's experience gave her first-hand understanding of the brutality and degradation of the institution of slavery. She used her life as a living testimony to challenge the assumptions that many white Americans held about the nature of slavery and the enslaved. Her speeches were often filled with simple but powerful truths about the dehumanizing effects of slavery, as well as the inherent strength and resilience of those who endured it. Truth's ability to speak so personally about slavery made her one of the most effective abolitionist speakers of her time. One of Truth's most important contributions to the abolitionist movement was her "Ain't I a Woman" speech, delivered in 1851 at the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio. Though the speech is often remembered as a key moment in the women's suffrage movement, it also had significant implications for the abolitionist movement. Truth used the speech to draw attention to the intersectionality of race and gender, challenging both the sexist views that dominated the suffrage movement and the racialized assumptions of the abolitionist movement. Her speech was a call for unity, arguing that the rights of women and Black people were intrinsically linked and that true justice could not be achieved until both groups were granted equal rights. Truth's efforts were instrumental in expanding the abolitionist movement, particularly by bringing attention to the voices and needs of Black women. At a time when the abolitionist movement was largely dominated by white men, Truth's voice was a powerful and necessary counterpoint. She challenged the patriarchal leadership of the movement by asserting the central role that Black women played in the struggle for freedom, a message that was often ignored or downplayed. Her insistence on Black women's inclusion in both abolitionist and suffrage movements reshaped the discourse on race and gender, making her a key figure in the fight for both racial and gender equality. Truth's work within the abolitionist movement also emphasized the need for immediate emancipation. While some abolitionists advocated for gradual emancipation, Truth was unyielding in her demand for immediate and complete freedom for all enslaved people. Her personal experiences with the injustice and violence of slavery fueled her urgency and made her one of the most vocal advocates for the immediate abolition of slavery. She spoke often about her own life as a slave, describing the pain and hardship of being torn from her family and the constant threat of violence she faced. This personal testimony made her an invaluable asset to the abolitionist movement, as she was able to speak from a place of lived experience, not just theory. Sojourner Truth's advocacy for freedom was also a call for human dignity. She believed that the abolition of slavery was not simply about freeing individuals from physical bondage, but about restoring their humanity. Slavery had stripped black people of their rights, their dignity, and their ability to control their own lives. Truth's work was not just about the abolition of a system, but about the reclamation of basic human rights for those who'd been dehumanized for centuries. Her speeches often included a moral component, appealing to people's consciences and urging them to consider the injustice of a system that treated other human beings as property. In addition to her speaking engagements, Truth worked closely with other abolitionists, including Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison, and Harriet Beecher Stowe, to promote the cause of abolition. She traveled widely, speaking to audiences across the northern United States, and was known for her ability to move people with her passion and clarity. Her participation in abolitionist organizations, her advocacy for emancipation, and her work in freedom campaigns helped to solidify her as a key figure in the movement to end slavery. Though she was primarily known for her work with abolitionism, Truth's commitment to justice did not end with the emancipation of enslaved people. She continued to advocate for the rights of freed black people after the Civil War, especially black women, who faced significant challenges in the aftermath of emancipation. Truth's post-war activism helped to lay the groundwork for the Reconstruction era and the ongoing fight for civil rights. Her work in the abolitionist movement, however, remains her most enduring contribution, as it set the stage for the broader struggle for racial justice and equality in the United States. Sojourner Truth's life and work were a powerful example of how one person's voice can change the course of history. Her dedication to the abolition of slavery, her commitment to the inclusion of black women in the fight for justice, and her unwavering belief in the equality of all people continue to inspire activists today. Truth's legacy in the abolitionist movement was not just about ending slavery. It was about creating a world where all people could live with dignity, freedom, and justice. Sojourner Truth's influence on the women's suffrage movement remains one of the most profound aspects of her legacy. Though she is often remembered for her role in the abolitionist movement, her tireless advocacy for women's rights, particularly the rights of black women, was integral to the development of the suffrage movement in the United States. Truth's efforts challenged the racial and gender boundaries that existed within both the abolitionist and suffrage movements, making her one of the most significant and pioneering figures in the fight for women's equality. In the mid-19th century, when women's suffrage was largely dominated by white women's voices, Truth's activism ensured that the rights and needs of black women were never forgotten. She understood that the struggles for racial and gender equality were not separate but interconnected, and her advocacy was a radical call for an inclusive approach to women's rights. Truth made it clear that black women's experiences, both as women and as black people, were integral to the conversation about gender equality. By emphasizing this intersectionality, she ensured that the fight for women's suffrage was not limited to a select group of women, but rather extended to all women, regardless of race. One of the most significant moments in Sojourner Truth's contribution to the women's suffrage movement came during the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio, in 1851. There she delivered her famous "Ain't I a Woman" speech, a powerful challenge to both the racism and sexism prevalent in 19th century America. In this speech, Truth confronted the prevailing assumptions about womanhood, questioning why women were considered weak and in need of protection, while she, as a black woman, had endured hardships far greater than most. Her words were a direct challenge to the suffragists who excluded black women from their movement, demanding that the same recognition and rights be extended to all women, regardless of race. The speech was a turning point in the women's suffrage movement, as it called attention to the fact that black women, who had suffered both the effects of slavery and the inequalities of gender, had been excluded from the movement's efforts. Truth's message was not just about gaining the right to vote. It was about redefining womanhood and asserting that all women, especially black women, deserve to be treated with dignity, respect, and equality. Her words echoed the themes of justice and freedom that had shaped her abolitionist work and framed them within the larger context of women's rights. Truth's inclusion in the suffrage movement was groundbreaking, as she brought attention to the ways in which racial and gender inequality intersected in the lives of black women. While Susan B., Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton are often credited with leading the women's suffrage movement, their work was criticized for its failure to fully address the needs and concerns of women of color. Truth's advocacy, however, insisted that suffrage must be inclusive and that the voices of black women must be heard in the fight for equality. She pushed for a more inclusive suffrage movement, one that recognized the unique challenges faced by women of color who experienced both racism and sexism. Although Truth's work within the suffrage movement was often sidelined by mainstream suffragists, her advocacy for women's rights was an essential part of the broader struggle for equality. Her call for the inclusion of black women's voices in the suffrage movement laid the foundation for future feminist movements that would emphasize intersectionality and inclusivity. Her example helped shape the direction of second-wave feminism in the 20th century, which sought to address not only women's rights but also the ways in which race, class, and gender intersected to create different experiences of oppression for women. Sojourner Truth's commitment to suffrage was not limited to speeches and advocacy. She also engaged in practical efforts to advance the cause. She travelled extensively, giving lectures and speeches to promote the importance of women's rights. In her later years, she worked alongside other suffrage leaders, including Susan B. Anthony, and participated in various campaigns aimed at securing the right to vote for women. Although she did not live to see the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, which granted women the right to vote, her work was crucial in bringing the issue to the forefront of national discussions, and in broadening the scope of the movement to include the voices of all women. Truth's legacy in the women's suffrage movement continues to be celebrated today. Her example of speaking truth to power, challenging oppressive systems and demanding justice for all women, regardless of race, has inspired countless suffragists and feminists throughout history. Modern-day feminists and suffrage advocates still look to Sojourner Truth as a model of courageous activism and inclusive justice. Her life reminds us that the fight for equality must include everyone, and that true progress is only achieved when no one is left behind. In contemporary discussions of suffrage and gender equality, Truth's legacy is continually invoked to remind us of the need for intersectional feminism, a feminism that recognizes the unique challenges faced by women of color and addresses the ways in which racism, sexism, and classism intersect to shape women's lives. As long as gender and racial inequalities persist, Sojourner Truth's work will remain a touchstone for those seeking a world where freedom, dignity, and justice are extended to all women, regardless of race, class, or background. Sojourner Truth's life and activism were not only pivotal to the abolition of slavery, but also laid the foundation for the modern understanding of civil rights in the United States. As one of the earliest and most outspoken advocates for racial justice, Truth challenged the racial norms of her time and pushed for the full recognition of Black Americans' humanity and citizenship. Her work continues to shape the fight for racial justice today, as her legacy has influenced generations of activists seeking to dismantle the systems of inequality that persist in America. Sojourner Truth's activism, grounded in the fight for freedom, equality, and human dignity, made her an essential figure in the early civil rights movement. While she lived before the civil rights movement of the 1960s, Truth's advocacy for the liberation of enslaved people and her work for the immediate abolition of slavery were early manifestations of what would become a broader movement for racial justice. Truth was among the first to recognize that true freedom could not be achieved unless black people were granted not only physical liberty, but also social, political, and economic equality. Throughout her life, Truth's work focused on breaking the racial barriers that denied black Americans their full rights. Her most powerful tool was her personal testimony. Having endured the brutality of slavery firsthand, she spoke from a position of lived experience. Truth's ability to tell her story, not as a victim but as a resilient and powerful survivor, gave her an unparalleled credibility within the abolitionist movement. Her life was a testimony to the possibility of freedom, not just for black men, but for black women, who faced an intersection of oppression that was often overlooked in both racial and gender justice movements. As a vocal advocate for the abolition of slavery, Truth worked alongside other abolitionists to challenge the institution that had kept millions of black people in bondage. Her lectures, speeches, and public appearances were some of the earliest forms of activism aimed at rallying people to the cause of freedom for enslaved black people. Her efforts to raise awareness about the horrors of slavery, often speaking to mixed-gender audiences, made her one of the most recognized figures in the abolitionist movement. Truth's call for justice did not end with the abolition of slavery. After the end of the Civil War and the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which officially granted freedom and citizenship to formerly enslaved people, Truth remained deeply involved in efforts to address the systemic racism that persisted in the lives of black Americans. She understood that legal freedom meant little if it was not accompanied by economic and political freedom. Her work in advocating for black people's rights in the post-war era, particularly the rights of black women, laid the groundwork for future civil rights movements. In the early 20th century, leaders of the civil rights movement, including figures such as W.E.B. Du Bois and Philip Randolph, recognized Sojourner Truth's contributions and honored her as a precursor to their own work. While Truth did not live to see the full achievement of the civil rights victories that would later be won in the 1960s, her activism provided a moral and historical foundation for the movement that sought to dismantle Jim Crow laws and secure the right to vote for African Americans. Truth's work also influenced women's rights activists in the 20th century, particularly those in the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, who began to recognize the unique challenges faced by black women. Activists such as Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Angela Davis carried forward the message Truth had articulated, that black women's struggles for freedom, dignity, and equality were integral to the larger fight for racial and gender justice. Sojourner Truth's legacy in this regard has been widely acknowledged, as her advocacy for black women was groundbreaking. She stood at the intersection of racial and gender justice long before the term intersectionality was coined, recognizing that the oppression of black women could not be understood separately from the systems of both racism and sexism. Truth's influence is also evident in the continued fight for racial equality that's seen in modern movements such as Black Lives Matter and the ongoing battles for voting rights, education, economic justice, and police reform. Black Lives Matter, founded in 2013, directly confronts the institutional racism that continues to affect black people in the United States, from disproportionate levels of police violence to economic inequality. The movement's call for black liberation and justice echoes Sojourner Truth's lifelong work to ensure that black people, particularly black women, have the same rights and freedoms as anyone else. The work that Truth began continues in today's racial justice activism, as Truth's unflinching demand for justice and equality is passed down through generations of activists. Her personal commitment to ending racial oppression, her powerful example of resilience, and her clear-eyed focus on inclusion in the struggle for civil rights serve as a model for today's efforts to dismantle systemic inequality. As modern activists continue to confront the legacy of slavery and the pervasive effects of racial injustice, They do so with the knowledge that they are standing on the shoulders of giants like Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth's impact on the fight for racial justice cannot be overstated. Her courage in confronting the racial hierarchies of her time, her leadership in advocating for the rights of black women, and her lifelong commitment to freedom and equality helped to lay the foundation for the civil rights movement and continues to inspire today's struggle for racial justice. Truth's call for a world where all people, regardless of race or gender, are recognized and treated with dignity still rings out today in the ongoing work to create a more just and equitable society. Sojourner Truth's influence, while deeply rooted in American history, has resonated globally, inspiring movements for equality and human rights across the world. Her unwavering commitment to justice, racial equality, and women's rights transcended national boundaries, making her a symbol of resistance and liberation for oppressed people everywhere. The ideas she championed, freedom from slavery, the equal treatment of women, and the recognition of black people's humanity, echo in global struggles that continue today. Sojourner Truth's advocacy for universal human rights has had a lasting impact on movements in countries beyond the United States. As a global symbol of resistance, Truth's life and work have inspired activists in a variety of anti-colonial and anti-apartheid movements, particularly in the fight against racial oppression and the discrimination of women. Her tireless work in confronting slavery and gender-based inequality aligns with the struggles faced by oppressed communities around the world. In particular, Truth's focus on the intersection of race and gender resonates with feminist and anti-racist movements worldwide, as her belief that both black women's rights and gender equality must be prioritized in the struggle for justice aligns with the global call for intersectional feminism. Her advocacy laid the groundwork for the later development of feminist movements in places like Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean, where colonialism and racism had compounded the challenges faced by women and marginalized groups. Feminist movements in countries such as South Africa and India also draw from Truth's example in advocating for the inclusion of black women and women of colour in their respective struggles for gender equality. In South Africa, Truth's legacy is present in the work of activists like Winnie Mandela and Albertina Sisulu, who fought not only against apartheid, but also for the inclusion of black women in leadership positions within the anti-apartheid movement. The continued struggles for gender equality and racial justice in South Africa owe much to the groundwork laid by Truth's advocacy, which emphasized the interconnectedness of these two causes. Similarly, in India, Sojourner Truth's message about the intersectionality of race and gender has influenced Indian feminists who have long advocated for the rights of Dalit women, often referred to as untouchables, and marginalized communities. Truth's rejection of societal limitations based on both race and gender has provided inspiration for social justice movements in India, which work to break down the rigid caste system and ensure that the voices of Dalit women are heard within the broader movement for gender equality. Sojourner Truth's advocacy for racial equality also has echoes in anti-apartheid movements around the world, particularly in South Africa. The leadership of Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu was influenced by global figures like Truth, whose commitment to equality and social justice laid the groundwork for many struggles against institutionalized racism. Just as Truth fought against the dehumanization of black people, Truth's message was amplified in the global fight against apartheid, where racial segregation and oppression were prevalent. The continued fight for racial justice in countries with colonial histories often invokes Sojourner Truth's spirit as a beacon of resilience. Truth's advocacy has also transcended the fight for racial and gender equality, reaching into the global human rights movement. Her belief in the inherent dignity of every person is reflected in the work of organizations such as Amnesty International, which fights for the protection of human rights around the world. Truth's refusal to accept a world in which people were denied their basic rights has inspired the work of those who advocate for refugees, asylum seekers, and other marginalized groups who continue to suffer from state-sanctioned violence and oppression. The universal truth that Sojourner Truth preached, that all people deserve dignity, equality, and justice, is echoed in the principles upheld by human rights organizations globally. Her legacy extends as well to the modern-day global fight against slavery and human trafficking. Sojourner Truth's life's work, aimed at ending slavery and securing freedom for all, has been invoked by organizations dedicated to eradicating modern-day slavery and trafficking. International organizations such as the United Nations and Anti-Slavery International continue to draw from the historical example of Truth's fight for freedom, using her legacy to push forward efforts to end human trafficking, exploitative labor, and the trafficking of women and children across borders. Truth's belief that all people have the right to be free from oppression informs contemporary work to secure basic freedoms for all. Additionally, Truth's voice has resonated across the Caribbean. In the wake of the abolition of slavery, Truth's work inspired Caribbean leaders like Mary Seacole and Claudia Jones, who worked to elevate the voices of black women in struggles against both colonialism and racism. Truth's tireless commitment to justice and equality influenced movements for independence in countries like Jamaica, where women played pivotal roles in the anti-colonial struggle. Sojourner Truth's legacy in global justice movements continues to be a source of strength and inspiration. Her intersectional approach, which recognized the intertwined nature of racism, sexism, and classism, remains essential in understanding and addressing the complex systems of oppression that exist in today's world. Her life reminds us that the fight for freedom, equality, and human dignity is not confined to any one time, place, or group, but is a global struggle that continues across borders, cultures, and communities. Sojourner Truth's enduring cultural significance goes beyond her activism and contributions to the abolitionist and women's rights movements. She's become a symbol of resilience, justice, and moral integrity. Truth's legacy transcends the historical moment in which she lived, continuing to influence modern social justice movements and serve as an example for anyone fighting against oppression. Her life remains a powerful narrative that embodies the struggle for human rights, particularly in the ongoing battle against racial, gender, and economic inequality. In contemporary culture, Sojourner Truth's image is synonymous with the power of personal testimony and the moral strength needed to challenge oppressive systems. Truth's first-hand account of slavery, coupled with her courage to speak publicly about her experiences, was revolutionary in its time. It laid the groundwork for how personal stories can be used to educate, inspire, and motivate change. Her decision to speak out not only about the brutality of slavery, but about the struggles and triumphs of black women, made her an enduring figure in American cultural memory. Her famous "Ain't I a Woman" speech is regularly quoted and studied in today's feminist and racial justice contexts. The speech directly challenged the dual oppression faced by black women, calling out the injustice that black women were often overlooked in both feminist and abolitionist circles. Sojourner Truth's insistence on intersectionality, the understanding that race, gender, and class cannot be separated in struggles for justice, has become a cornerstone in modern feminist and civil rights theory. Truth's legacy is also preserved in public commemorations. Throughout the United States, memorials, statues, and museums dedicated to her honor have been established, ensuring that her contributions are recognized for generations to come. One such memorial, located in Florence, Massachusetts, features a statue of Sojourner Truth with a raised hand, symbolizing her strength and resolve in the face of adversity. These physical tributes allow visitors and future generations to learn about her life, and in doing so they serve as constant reminders of her tireless commitment to justice. In literature, Truth continues to be a central figure. Her story has been written about extensively, both in historical works and in fictionalized narratives. Her life has been the subject of novels, poetry, and children's books, all of which present her as an icon of courage and moral clarity. Works like Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman by Glenys W.M., Lee and the Narrative of Sojourner Truth, which she dictated to Olive Gilbert, ensure that Truth's legacy is passed down through generations, introducing her to new audiences who can draw inspiration from her story. Films and documentaries also continue to bring her story to life. Sojourner Truth, A Life of Struggle and Strength, PBS, as well as other dramatized accounts of her life, introduce her journey to a wide audience. These adaptations showcase her bravery and moral authority, painting a vivid portrait of her character and the historical forces she fought against. These portrayals emphasize not just her activism, but the depth of her spiritual beliefs, showing how her religious faith fueled her advocacy for justice. Sojourner Truth's cultural significance is also felt in the continued fight for racial justice. Her advocacy for Black people's rights and her work to ensure the freedom and dignity of all human beings has made her a symbol in the ongoing Black Lives Matter movement and other social justice campaigns. Her words are invoked in speeches and protests, particularly those that challenge institutional racism and police violence. Truth's insistence that all people, especially those who've been historically marginalized, deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, continues to resonate in today's battle for racial equality. Her role in the women's rights movement also remains significant, especially in today's feminist discourse. Sojourner Truth's life serves as a reminder of the long history of Black women's activism, and her contributions are foundational to modern-day efforts to address issues like gender-based violence, equal pay, and reproductive rights. As the fight for gender equality continues, Truth's example of perseverance and resilience continues to inspire feminists, particularly those working at the intersections of race, gender, and class. Sojourner Truth's message of freedom, equality, and social justice continues to guide us today. Her insistence on the intersectionality of race, gender, and class has shaped not only modern movements for social justice, but also the way in which we approach activism itself. Truth's life challenges us to think more deeply about the ways in which various forms of oppression are interconnected, and how those who are marginalized often bear the brunt of multiple systems of injustice. In global activism, Truth's example has influenced movements for human rights and economic justice around the world. Activists in countries from South Africa to India and from the Caribbean to Latin America have drawn inspiration from her fierce advocacy for Black people's rights and women's dignity. Her call for freedom and equality transcends national borders, resonating with people everywhere who continue to fight for justice and dignity in the face of oppression. In an era marked by racial tensions, gender inequality, and economic disparities, Sojourner Truth's enduring cultural significance reminds us that the work of achieving true equality is ongoing. Her life's work serves as both a blueprint for how to approach activism and a call to action for future generations who must continue the fight for freedom, justice, and human dignity. Truth's legacy is not just a chapter in history, it is a living, breathing force that inspires all those who believe in a more just and compassionate world. As we reflect on the remarkable life and contributions of Sojourner Truth, it becomes clear that her legacy is not only a part of history, but a living force that continues to shape the present and guide future generations in the ongoing struggles for justice, equality, and human dignity. Sojourner Truth's journey from slavery to freedom, her advocacy for both racial and gender equality, and her unwavering commitment to truth and justice are central to understanding the path toward a more just and inclusive world. Truth's voice, powerful and steady, continues to resonate through the ages. Her work in the abolitionist movement was groundbreaking, not just in fighting for the freedom of enslaved black people, but in challenging the very structures of oppression that upheld slavery. She made clear that freedom must not be confined to one group, but extended to all, and that true liberation is only possible when equality is achieved for all people, regardless of race, gender, or background. Sojourner Truth's advocacy for immediate emancipation and her insistence on full citizenship for black Americans laid the foundation for later movements in the civil rights era. Her activism for women's rights remains just as vital. Sojourner Truth's inclusion of black women in the women's suffrage movement, her call for equality for women of all races, and her insistence that gender and race cannot be separated in the fight for justice set the stage for modern-day intersectional feminism. Truth's work challenged the limitations of mainstream feminism, demanding that black women's voices be centered in the fight for women's liberation. Her demand for justice transcended the boundaries of race and gender, creating a model for activism that remains relevant today. In today's social justice movements such as Black Lives Matter, #MeToo and Time's Up, Sojourner Truth's legacy serves as a touchstone for understanding the interconnectedness of race, gender, and class in the fight for equality. Truth's life and work remind us that justice is not a single issue but a network of struggles that require collective action. Her call for freedom, dignity, and human rights for all people resonates in the global fight against systemic oppression and inequality. Whether it's the fight against police violence, economic injustice, or gender-based violence, Truth's legacy inspires those who continue to confront these injustices head-on. Sojourner Truth's impact is also evident in the ongoing work to dismantle systemic racism. As movements worldwide push for justice for black people and other marginalized groups, Truth's example reminds us of the ongoing work needed to create a world where equality is truly realized. Her call for racial justice, her insistence on equality, and her vision for a world where all people are free from oppression have shaped the way we understand and approach these issues today. Her life reminds us that the fight for freedom is never over, and each generation must continue the work she began. The cultural significance of Sojourner Truth is just as profound. Her image, her words, and her story continue to inspire artists, writers, activists, and educators around the world. Her speeches have been immortalized in books, plays, and films, and her name is invoked in ongoing efforts to create a world that reflects the values she fought for. From statues and memorials to scholarships and educational programs, Truth's legacy lives on in public spaces, ensuring that future generations will learn about her contributions to the abolitionist movement and the women's rights movement. Truth's spirit lives on in the fight for human rights globally. Her activism for freedom and justice has become an inspiration for human rights advocates, working to eliminate modern-day slavery, child labor, human trafficking, and other forms of exploitation. Her life serves as a beacon for those pushing for the recognition of the inherent dignity of every person, regardless of their race, gender, or nationality. In this way, Sojourner Truth's work continues to impact not just the United States, but the entire world. Sojourner Truth's legacy is one of resilience, compassion, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of a better world. Her work for freedom, justice, and equality transcended the challenges of her time and laid the groundwork for future generations to build upon. While we may never know the full extent of the global change she inspired, it is clear that her contributions remain vital to the ongoing struggles for justice and human rights. Truth's example teaches us that no matter how difficult the road may seem, the fight for justice is worth every step. In remembering Sojourner Truth, we are reminded that the work of creating a more just world is never complete. Her life teaches us the importance of perseverance, of lifting up the voices of the marginalized, and of standing firm in our commitment to equality. She was not only a trailblazer of her time, but a guiding light for us all. showing us that we too can make a difference in the ongoing fight for freedom, justice, and human dignity. As we come to the end of this journey through the life and legacy of Sojourner Truth, we are reminded of the enduring power of her voice, her courage, and her relentless pursuit of justice. From the moment she first stepped onto the stage to speak out against the injustices of slavery and the oppression of women, to her tireless efforts in advocating for racial and gender equality, Sojourner Truth showed the world the power of one determined individual to bring about change. Her influence continues to be felt today in the ongoing struggles for racial justice, gender equality, economic freedom, and human rights. Truth's unwavering belief in the inherent dignity of every human being, regardless of race, gender, or background, continues to inspire activists around the world, reminding us all that the fight for justice is far from over. Her legacy calls on us to persist in the pursuit of a more just and equitable world, where the voices of the oppressed are not only heard, but acted upon. Sojourner Truth's life was a testament to the strength of the human spirit, and her work remains a blueprint for how we can continue to challenge systems of oppression. As we reflect on her contributions, let us carry her message forward in our own lives, that no matter how great the struggle, no matter how impossible the task may seem, we must stand together for justice and equality, just as she did. Her words, her life, and her activism will continue to resonate as a powerful reminder that freedom, equality, and justice are not just ideals to strive for, but principles that must be defended every day by each and every one of us. Thank you for joining in this exploration of Sojourner Truth's incredible journey. Let her legacy live on in the work we do, the voices we lift, and the change we continue to push for. May we all take inspiration from her unshakable belief in justice and equality, and carry it forward to create a better, more just world